Noa. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome to this meeting, this webinar. I'm Carl Hanger, I'm a geriatrician. I'll fill my cell phone. Apologies, I'm a geriatrician, I'm a stroke physician in Christchurch. And I've got the pleasure and honour of chairing this webinar. And behind the scenes, we've got people from the South Island Alliance, the South Island Stroke Working Group assisting me. And Jane Large from the South Island Alliance will be helping me with collating the question and answers session at the conclusion. As I said, we're part of the South Island Alliance Stroke Working Group, and the South Island part of the larger National Stroke Network, and so we're one of the regional hubs. Normally we've run an annual South Island Stroke Education Day, and unfortunately last year in November we had to cancel that due to the obvious reason of COVID. One of the silver linings, if you like, of that cancellation, and whilst we can't network, has been that we've been able to turn some of the speakers' presentations into webinars like this. And that has a silver lining. We can open it up to more people, and not just South Island, but across New Zealand. It means that it's widely available. For the 2021 meeting, we had quite a lineup of speakers, and it's great that we've been able to utilise, I think, 2 or 3 of the speakers so far, and I think this is the third one. We hope to run another 1 or 2 later on this year in the next 2 or 3 months. This is a learning experience for us running these webinars, so we do appreciate your feedback, and we'll give you a vehicle for providing that feedback later on at the end of this webinar. Some housekeeping. You'll be all on mute during the presentations. It's got the advantage you can't heckle me. Please ask questions using the Q&A box down the bottom middle of your screen. Don't use the chat screen, because that's we will be using the Q&A function and for questions answered for Chris and Nick. Jane and I will put those questions to Chris and Nick at the end of their webinar. And if we don't get time for all the questions to be answered, we will put those to Chris and Nick to answer by email later on. We're excited that this is quite a big webinar. We've had over 200 register, and I see we've got 98, 99 and counting joined us so far, so that's great. That's really encouraging to have that number just learning about aphasia. It's my pleasure to introduce Chris Wiles and Nick Gibbons. Both are clinical educators in the School of Psychology, Speech and Hearing at the University of Canterbury. Hope I've got that right. Chris is also a community aphasia advisor for Aphasia NZ. And I've been lucky enough and had the privilege of working with them both over quite some years in a variety of places, in inpatient stroke rehab in the community, and in different roles within the community for stroke. And both of them are very, very capable and have a lot of wisdom and experience to share. I'd love to say that we planned this session in June, which, because we knew it was Aphasia Awareness Month, but we didn't know that, but it's fortuitous and we'll claim it. Over the years, I've tried a variety of strategies to communicate with people with aphasia, and some have worked, some didn't, or I botched it up. And I very much learned on the job, and I've particularly valued the role modelling that the speech language therapists that I've worked with have shown me. and people like Chris and Nick, either on the ward or in the community stroke team. But I've still got plenty to learn, so I'm looking forward to this afternoon's session, because it's entitled Practical Tips for Improving Communication with People with Aphasia. And it looks to be really practical and contain tips for just everyday work, our day-to-day work. So I'm hoping that I can apply something tomorrow or the next day. As Chris said to me, none of the techniques are difficult. They're easy to learn. Even I can learn them. She didn't say that, but they're not necessarily intuitive. So bring it on. So Nick is going to speak first, then hand over to Chris, and then we'll have questions at the end. So thank you very much, Nick and Chris.
Kia ora, Carl. Thank you for that welcome. Kia ora koutou, ko Nicola Takawingawa. I'm Nick Gibbons. I'm a clinical educator here at the university. And as Carl alluded to, I was a speech language therapist in the community stroke rehab team here in Christchurch for a good decade. I shall not say just how long that was. Thoroughly enjoyed that work with people with aphasia, and I'm very grateful to be able to continue that in my new role here at the university alongside Chris, who you may be able to see on your screens, but we'll hear more from later on. So how we're going to work the webinar is I will first give us an introduction to what aphasia is, and then I'm going to pass over to Chris, who will go through the tips and strategies in more detail. Ordinarily, if we were in person, I might use this time to have a show of hands as to who's interacted with people with aphasia in the past. I'm assuming that most of you have come here because you've worked with someone with aphasia or know someone or have heard of somebody or something to do with aphasia, which has sparked your interest. But before we get into the tips, we'll just make sure we have a shared understanding of what aphasia is. So when I'm conceptualizing what aphasia is, I quite like this diagram here that you can see from sayaphasia.org. It shows a good example of how a person with aphasia has got the same thoughts, memories, personal identity that they always had, but difficulty with getting their thoughts into words or understanding the meaning behind what others might be saying. We know that about 30% of people who've had a stroke will experience aphasia, and that results in New Zealand to be about 3,000 new incidences of aphasia a year. Sometimes it's the person's communication difficulty might be mild, sometimes it might be very profound. And we know that aphasia is associated with depression, isolation, and loneliness. So strategies like the ones that Chris is going to illustrate today can be very useful in helping alleviate some of those feelings of isolation, while also ensuring you get good quality information from the people with aphasia that you're working with. When talking about what aphasia is, I'll zoom into this slide so it's a little clearer. The clear definition is that aphasia is impaired language function caused by focal brain damage. And in the brain diagram there, you can see a kind of bluish, greenish area and a purple area. Those are Wernicke's and Broca's areas, respectively, where the most aphasias will result from damage to those areas. And aphasia is this impaired language function that can mask competence and affects relationships, roles, and activities. Coming back to my face. So when we think of aphasia, we can think of some people, it can be very difficult for those of us who've never experienced aphasia to really get a grip of what it might be like to experience it. Some people have compared their experiences to perhaps waking up in France, not being able to speak the language, but still having all the memories and the knowledge that makes you who you are. And it's often associated with a lot of frustration as people are unable to share their knowledge and their thoughts and experiences with you. Again, the tips that Chris is going to go through with us today will help us in alleviating some of that frustration with the people we might work with. So if we know that aphasia is a language disorder, as opposed to a speech disorder, where someone might use the wrong sounds or have a slurred or quiet voice, or a disorder of memory, what then are the symptoms or the signs of an aphasia? And we've got this little diagram from the Lovelace blog there that does a good job of explaining what someone with aphasia might present like. So some people with aphasia will have difficulty speaking clearly, and this isn't in a way of having a slurred voice, but perhaps in using the wrong sounds when they're talking. They might have difficulty understanding what we are saying to them, difficulty with reading what's written on the page or recognizing the symbols, trouble remembering the words or being able to name objects, and difficulty writing clearly, which is not just the motor movements of the hand, or which is not the motor movements of the hand, but perhaps knowing what spelling is required, or how to form the letters, or what grammar the sentence might need. Often we define aphasia into fluent and non-fluent, and there can be more labels for aphasia than just those two. But today I'll give you a very quick example of what a non-fluent aphasia and a fluent aphasia is, so that we can understand and appreciate some of the wide variety that exists in people with aphasia. So it's pretty common sometimes for speech therapists to use this picture here that some of you might be familiar with. And if I bring it into the full perspective there, you can see this picture of a kitchen with two children up to no good in the background. And in the writing on the side is a quote from somebody with a non-fluent aphasia. And the dots there, the full stops, show where the person's pausing to get their words out. Mother and dad, no. Mother, dishes, running over water and floor, and they are wiping dishes. I won't go read the whole example out, but you can see there some of the symptoms we spoke about before, about having difficulty with the right sounds and difficulty thinking of the words that they want to say, are evident in this non-fluent sample, where someone can't express their thoughts as quickly or as easily as they otherwise would have. The other kind of aphasia that we often talk about is a fluent aphasia. And in this kind of aphasia, a person may be able to talk quite smoothly and rapidly, but they might not be able to get very many meaningful words out. And I'll show you an example of what a fluent aphasia might look like in somebody now. So again, we've got the same picture, and the first thing that might strike you is that this person with aphasia is speaking quite a lot of words compared to the other one. But if we read through what they said, we can see there's not a huge amount of information. I can't tell you what that is, but I know what it is, but I don't know where it is, but I don't know what's under. I know you couldn't say, I couldn't say what it is. I couldn't say what that is. That should be right in there. That's very bad in there. I'll just bring myself back. So we can see there an example of somebody who is still having a lot of difficulty with being able to get the right words at the right time, but it's not that more silent presentation that we might see in someone with a non-fluent aphasia. When we talk about aphasia, we've also got these ways of conceptualizing what people might have difficulty with their understanding or their receptive language, their ability to make sense of what we're saying. For example, when you speak slowly, it's all right, but if you speak too quickly, it's as if I can hear only sounds. I can't understand very well. Whoop. I'm just going to skip forward to another example of what people with aphasia have described their experiences like. So I'll bring this one up for you now. When two people with aphasia are reflecting on what it's like to have word finding difficulties or difficulty thinking of the right word. What's in my head doesn't come out of my mouth. And it's just as if there's an empty space, like opening doors and there's nothing in there. But that's the only way I could describe it. It was just as if my brain was a cake and a piece of it was cut out. So now we have a very quick overview of what aphasia might look like or be experienced by or feel like to the people who have experienced it. We can think about what those people might like in their communication partners or the people that they're talking with, their healthcare providers, their family and their friends, the kind of strategies and approaches that they might like those people to take. Recently, one of our clients here at the university clinic had this comment to make. Aphasia is aphasia. I'm still me. I'm still here, which is a good way of viewing that aphasia is separate from someone's personal identity and intellectual abilities. Other comments that people with aphasia have made about what they like in their health professionals are things like, I like it when we talk together. I like it when they get to know me. We know that people with aphasia often feel very isolated, and so in hospitals can often be, for want of a better word, perhaps ignored or not have so many interactions with their health team. And often from the health professional's perspective, this can be because we don't know what to say or what strategies we can use, or we might feel embarrassed or perhaps we might make things worse. But happily, we have quite a few strategies that we can use to make communication more effective. So on that note, I'm going to invite Chris to join me on the virtual stage. Hopefully you'll be able to see Chris as she shares her screen now. When we were approached to talk about tips and strategies to use for people with aphasia, I couldn't think of anyone more qualified to share that information than Chris, who has been working with people for aphasia for a very long time in many capacities, including as a community aphasia advisor for Aphasia NZ and as a speech language therapist, and also as a clinical educator, teaching the next generation of SLTs how best to interact with people with aphasia. Chris, would you like to?
I would like you to come through, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
I've looked this up as I knew I would.
Not at all. So one of my unexpected roles today is tech support, which is not a role I'm super comfortable in. So you'll see me just disappear off screen and then reappear in the door behind Chris as we get her screen sharing.
So whilst Chris is doing that, I just encourage you just to ask questions in the Q&A if you've got a chance, and particularly just put them in as you go and as you're listening. I've managed to jot down a few questions already, so feel free to do that.
All right. Okay.
Okay, and so we're still working a little bit behind the scenes. Press the X there, Chris.
There.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And come back over here and film again. Mm-hmm. Perfect.
Okay. And that. Yeah.
Okay. Share screen.
Yeah.
Green button.
Oh yes, thank you. I'm not panicking, and this sounds on, and we're away.
Hooray.
Okay, thank you, Nick. Okay, I practiced that so many times, and I still mucked it up. So, my name's Chris, and I will just get going, I think. So, if you think about interacting with somebody with aphasia, often you have some reticence about doing that. And I think some of that comes from your concern about how you're going to build rapport, excuse me, with someone who isn't able to give a lot back. And it's very easy to get into this pattern almost of interrogating someone, because you ask a question, you don't get a lot back, so you ask another question.
Can I just cut in, Chris, just for one moment? You've got your presentation view rather than that, or if you go up to your top left under display settings and just click on the display settings, maybe the next one along.
Yep.
And click on that. And then it's swap presenter view with slideshow. And then, that's great.
Okay.
And you might need to go back one if you've got slips.
Yep. Okay.
That's great.
Yep. All right. Thank you. So a tool that can really help with this is a personal passport. It doesn't take a long time to put together. And once you've got it and you carry it with you, it's a really good tool for breaking the ice. It allows the relationship to become more equal. It allows the person with aphasia to ask you questions about the content in your passport, and hopefully there'll be some kind of connection within there that they can make with themselves. You can include as much information as you feel comfortable with sharing, and it might be very specific to the place that you work in. So for instance, if you work in the community and you're going into a person's home and you might visit them more than once, you might include a bit more about yourself than perhaps if you're working on a busy ward and you won't have too many interactions, and it's more important that they understand what your role is. But it's still good to have something personal in there just to develop that rapport. So I'll just quickly flick through this. You definitely don't need to put everything in here. These are just suggestions. So as I said, you put in as much or as little as you feel comfortable with. But so this is mine. It's pretty brief. It shows you who I am, what I do, who I work for, where I live, a little bit about my family. I haven't put in photos about my family because I don't feel that comfortable with it. Some people are fine with that. Some things about some of the interests I have, and maybe some of the people that I'm interacting with might have shared. The pet one always works, or often works. So yeah, that's mine, and it's pretty basic, but yeah, that's really all you need. So in terms of what or how you would structure your personal passport, or in fact any kind of written resource for a person with aphasia, you need to keep things pretty plain and simple. Embellishments and making things pretty don't help a person with their comprehension at all. So I've given you a link here, and this guideline is a really practical, good guideline for how you can use written text to help comprehension and provide information to someone. The main thing is keeping plenty of white space on the page and bolding the keywords and using, simple sentence structures. So moving along, I'm now going to talk about the supported conversation approach, or SCAR, it's often referred to. I'm not going to be able to go into a lot of depth, so I just want you to understand the key principles that SCAR has. The first, the key principle, I would say, is this acknowledgement of competence. So you go in with the mindset that the person that you're interacting with is still a competent communicator, and it's up to us to reveal that competency. And yeah, the whole sort of approach is designed for people who know more than they can say. So as Nick was just saying, their intelligence isn't affected, it's their language that's affected. So in terms of how you reveal the competence, you use techniques, and as Carl said in the introduction, the techniques in themselves aren't tricky, but they're not natural, because we're hardwired to talk, and we want to talk, and the person with aphasia wants to talk. They might be quite reluctant to use some of these techniques, So it's important that you model them, that you show them that it works, and that, yeah, I'll show you a clip where you see that happening. So in terms of revealing competence, the idea is that you help get your message in. You help the person understand what it is you're trying to communicate. You help them get their message out. And they're the same techniques, but used in different ways. And then that you verify that you've both understood the message, and that's really key. That before you move on, you make sure you're both understanding the same thing. So in terms of acknowledging competence, you need to speak naturally with normal loudness, using an adult tone of voice. So sometimes when people speak, sometimes you can get into a bit of a sing-song sort of pattern, which is perceived as patronizing. So try to keep that natural tone of voice. You do need to slow your speech rate right down. And that is something we hear from people with aphasia a lot, slow down, because they're needing to work really hard to, first of all, process what it is that you've said to them, and then what it is that what they're going to respond with. Using phrases such as, I know you know, or I know you have more to say than you're able to, is a really transparent way of acknowledging that they have got language in there, but their aphasia is preventing them from expressing themselves. And deal openly with situations in which you have to communicate with a partner to obtain or give information. So by that, I mean, if you are turning to the spouse to get more information because the person with aphasia can't give that to you, then be quite forthright about saying, is it all right with you if I ask your wife, or if I ask your daughter some of this information, so that you are still acknowledging that they're there, that they've got that information, but they can't share it with you. So focus on what is important to the client at the time as much as you can. I know in our busy work lives, sometimes our priorities are the priority, but if you know that the client's really got something they're trying to communicate, if you can't give them the time then, but say you can come back later, then make sure you do, okay? If the communication breaks down, then if you can sort of take on that responsibility of saying, look, I'm so sorry, I'm just not getting it. Let's see if we can work this out together, rather than them feeling, the person with aphasia feeling that they are constantly failing, because that is something that we hear from people with aphasia. They feel like they are the ones letting you down. So I've talked about how you can be really direct, but also you can be indirectly acknowledging a person's competency by the tone of your voice, use of shared humour. Sometimes if there is frustration and things break down, using humour can actually reduce the frustration. With reduced frustration, a person can sometimes be more fluent. And with your choice of topic, so something that actually is interesting or meaningful to your client. So in terms of how do you go about revealing competency, we'll talk about how you get your message in to start with. So think about if it's something more than sort of chit chat, have a little think before you start your interaction about how you are going to make your message clear, how you can use short, simple sentences in an expressive voice, how you can focus on one thing at a time and be very clear when you're changing topic. So actually say, I'm going to change topic now. Repeat and rephrase as needed, because that reiteration is going to help people, even with only mildly impaired comprehension. That repetition and rephrasing is really going to help. Pace how much information you give at once. So if it's something that's quite complex or new to them, you might want to sort of put that information into chunks. make sure they've understood the first chunk before you come back. And if there's someone who fatigues very quickly, you might give them some information, let them have a rest, come back, quickly revise what you've done and carry on. And keep watching for those visual cues that the client or the patient isn't understanding you. Because often it's their non-verbal communication that tells you a huge amount. So as you're talking, use gestures that the client can easily understand. You probably, I don't know if you can see, I tend to flap my arms while I'm talking. It's not meaningful gesture, but do you want a drink is a really meaningful gesture. So are you feeling cold, or have you got pain somewhere? All those types of things, they are meaningful. And by you using them, the client or the patient will often use that model and start using gesture themselves. So just to illustrate that.
I'm wondering about with the summer coming, you know, the summer's coming, May, June, July, August.
Yeah.
If you're going to be doing some trips, if you're going to be going and doing some fishing.
Yeah.
Are you going to be doing some fishing this summer?
Fishing.
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 You're going to be going up north doing some fishing?
I don't know.
You don't know. Going to be going up north?
Yeah. And here.
Not sure. Because I know that you used to do a lot of.
Yeah. Here.
So are you showing me the fishing line?
Yeah. Nice.
Have you ever caught like a really
No,
not a big fish story?
No.
Eh? We haven't caught a big fish.
No. I don't like it.
So just before I go on to this slide, what you saw happening there is that the therapist started with her gestures, then the client picked up on that and she started using gestures, but then her gestures became more elaborate. So you actually sort of got the sense that she was actually a very competent fly fisherwoman, and that, yeah, that nice sort of humor that they shared at the end about the big fish story, all done with talking plus all those gestures, meant it was a much richer interaction than if it was just talking by itself. So yeah, gesture, when it's meaningful, can be really, really effective. The other thing that, that we really push our students to start using as soon as they start interacting with people with aphasia is always having paper and a pen handy and using written keywords. So even though the person with aphasia might tell you that they can no longer read, there's been plenty of research that's shown that using written keywords together with talk and gesture perhaps, and perhaps pictures, makes a big difference. So use a black pen on white paper. Just write the keywords. You don't have to worry about all the little grammatical words. Write in large letters. Highlight the topic by you underline it or you put a text box around it. I should say here that if you're using telepractice, you can share your screen and open a text box and type in, same thing, big font, black letters bolding the keywords as you're on your Zoom session. Only use 4 to 5 pieces of information on each page. A new topic means a new page. And again, if you go back to the slide that I had earlier, you'll see some good guidelines for how you can use written text, or if you're using typing into on a Zoom session, how you would do that. It's good to, in a conversation, keep all those pages, because sometimes when there is a breakdown and you decide together that you're going to come back to it, you can come back to where you left off rather than the person with aphasia having to use all that energy to go right back to the start, okay? And it's also good if you know that you've left something but you're going to come back to it in a couple of days. You can also remind yourself where you left things. Drawing. Now, drawing is one that that therapists and health professionals steer clear of, because we have this idea that you have to be a really good drawer. You don't. You just have to be able to do a functional drawing. Stick people are fine. Encourage the patient or the client to draw with you, and they might add to your drawing. And it might not just be a drawing. I worked with a chap who had been an engineer. He could do very detailed diagrams with arrows, and so you'd actually sort of understand a process because of the way he used drawings and diagrams. It's also very good for people with poor auditory comprehension, because yeah, they've got this sort of visual representation of what it is that you're trying to say in front of them. Oops. Using a generic communication book or a chart, and you'll see this being used in the next video. So this is something I know that at Burwood Hospital on DG, they've got some of these books on the ward. If you're someone who does interact with people with aphasia, even only if it's sometimes in your workplace, having one of these is an absolute godsend, in that it can speed things up and clarify things so quickly. So it's one that you can use with lots of different people rather than their personal communication book. So the types of things that that I'd suggest you have in there would be to have a yes/no chart, to have a you're on the wrong track chart, because quite often everyone expends a lot of energy, and then you realize you have both gone down the wrong track and you've got to backtrack then. Numbers are up to 30, because dates and times are really tricky for people with aphasia. So yeah, oh, it should be 31. Having a clock face so that you can actually sort of point to where in the day it might be, whatever it is that you're talking about might be happening or it did happen. A map of the world and a map of New Zealand and a map of your own city or town are also really handy. Having a pain chart, so you know the outline of a body, some pictures or photos of discharge destinations, and then you might have some that are specific to your own profession, so walking aids or feeding methods or activities of daily living, that kind of thing. So they do take a bit of time to put together, but if you keep adding to them, they're just such a good resource. And as I said, they can save you both a lot of time and frustration. And often, once you've established the topic or some detail within that topic, the frustration reduces, and again, the person might be more fluent or more willing to use other techniques to get their message out. So how can you help your client have a way to answer or ask questions? So ask yes/no questions and make sure that the client has a way to respond. So they might say yes when they mean no, and then you can read from their face that they're frustrated that that came out wrong. So having that chart, that yes/no chart there, or some gestural, like, you know, thumbs up, thumbs down type of response is really important. You just ask one thing at a time. So it is a forced choice. If it's a yes/no question, you don't want to ask two questions in one. That just gets confusing. So phrase your yes/no questions in a logical sequence. So you start general and then you whittle it down to something more specific. So again, you have to sort of have a bit of forward planning for that. Ask the client to give you clues by encouraging them to use those techniques we've just talked about. Gesturing, pointing to objects or pictures, using written keywords, and phrases like, can you show me? It's almost like you give permission or encouragement and they will do it. But often they don't unless you give that encouragement. And sorry, just going back also, when I was talking about the generic resource book, if the person has had a communication book or a chart made for them by their speech language therapist, they often won't initiate using that, especially in the early days, because as I was saying earlier, it's not the natural thing to do. So again, you need to encourage the use of those books and charts by saying, oh, could it be in your book? Shall we have a look? And then often it will be, or there'll be something close enough that it helps that person express what it is they're trying to say. And give the patient or the client time to respond. And often that delay of allowing them time to respond feels unnaturally long. And if you're a person who's not particularly comfortable with silence and you want to fill the gaps in, you have to resist that urge. And then if they are still struggling, that's when you say, do you want me to help you? But going in too quickly and giving lots of options is quite confusing and disrupts their thought pattern. So yeah, you do have to allow that delay. So talk to the client about the process. So you're talking about your conversation as you go. So you would say, I noticed that writing the keyword helps you express yourself, or I noticed that using gestures helps you express yourself. So you're actually sort of encouraging the use of their strategies. And then you might, if their yes, no isn't particularly clear, you could say, is it easier for you to indicate yes or no by pointing? So give them another option. Remind the patient or the client that they have time, that there's no rush, you're happy to wait. Encourage them to talk and acknowledge that talking is hard for them. So, I can see how hard you're working. I can see how frustrating this is for you. That sort of acknowledgement again. Reassure that if talking is not possible, there are other options and that you're really happy to work with them with those other options. Yeah. Encouraging them to write. So again, having that paper and a pen handy. So I'm talking as if, yeah, you sort of got a nice big table to be sitting at. I know that often in a hospital setting or even in a rest home setting, you don't always have sort of that space, but if you can take them to that space or clear the tray of all their stuff so that they've just got that pen and paper in front of them, that's really helpful. Reassure them if they're using their non-dominant hand that their writing is fine. It just has to be legible. It doesn't have to be neat or tidy. If you are doing the writing, provide options for them to choose from. So you might say, did you go to the movies? And if they've said yes, then you might write some options of the movies that are currently on, and then they can point to the one that they've actually been to, rather than them having to try to describe the movie or name it. And then include something else in your list, because sometimes our lists aren't complete and it might be something else. And then we've got to do more research. We're living in an age where we can Google things and look things up. So again, be quite transparent about that and say, do you mind if I just Google that? I'll see if I can find what this something else is, because it might not be right there in front of you, or something that you have in your brain. Again, so the same techniques, but this time you're encouraging the person to be using the technique. So encouraging them to draw. So actually asking them, can you draw it? And then again, the same thing, reassure them that it doesn't have to be high art, just has to be something you can both share the meaning from. Yes, sorry. This is using resources that you might have, like the generic resource book. You have to sort of encourage, can you show me? Then get them to use their personal communication book. If you're in their home and even in their hospital room, often they'll have personal photos, and you can ask them to show you if they can't get the name of a person or a place. Use of newspapers and real objects, so household items can help. So it depends on where you are, but yeah, if they could show you, again, that shared topic is half the battle. And then the last key point, and a really important aspect of this approach, is that you verify that you have checked to make sure you understand. So you need to summarize slowly and clearly what you think the client is trying to say. So a phrase like, so let me make sure I understand. And you tell them what you have understood, and then check that that is indeed what they had intended telling you. And again, you can add in gesture or written keywords if necessary, rather than them having to listen. So you might write down the key points you've taken from your interaction. So yeah, you reflect on what the person has said. So are you telling me that? And say that. Then you might expand on what has been said. So are you telling me that, da, 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 and I can see, and then you add your observation or your comment, and then you pull everything together at the end of the longer discussion and say, let's see if I have this right. So I'm going to show you a video. So the earlier video was a very experienced clinician working with a client. This video is of one of the speech language therapy students here at the university. She and her communication partner are interacting. So the student has had a 2-hour lecture and done a couple of role plays, but that is the extent of her training. So she hasn't got any theory about aphasia behind her, but she has taken on all these suggestions that I've just been talking about. You'll also see that the conversation partner, she has gone and got, it's actually the order of service from her late husband's funeral. So the student's asking her about her family. So I just want you to have a look at all the resources. She's got her pen and paper there. She's got a resource book there. She looks like some cards. The client's also got some paper in front of her, and you'll see the student using gesture. She also does a lovely job at the end of the interaction of verifying. I don't think she does any direct acknowledgement, but notice her tone of voice and her nice slow speech rate. So
it looks like there's 2 girls and a boy.
Yeah, that's
So you've
right.
got 2 girls and 1 boy.
That's right.
And do they live in New Zealand? Do they live in Christchurch?
2 do.
2 live in Christchurch.
But they do.
Where does he live? Overseas? Ah, overseas. Can you point on the map where he lives? Turkey.
Yeah,
He lives in Turkey.
but just
Wow.
Well, he sits out then, dear.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that is where. What's his name? No, I can't.
That's okay. I've learnt a lot about him. So you have 3 children. So let's check what I know.
Yeah.
So, your previous husband was called Joseph.
That's right.
And Joseph and you had 3 kids.
Yeah, that's right.
2 girls and 1 boy.
Yeah,
And the 2 girls live in New Zealand.
yeah,
Do they live in Christchurch?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And the 1 boy lives overseas
yeah.
in Turkey.
No, not Turkey.
Not Turkey?
Oh. Gee.
Q.
What's the time?
That's okay. We can have a look around there. Is it around Turkey?
It's about there.
Qatar?
Yes.
Qatar!
Why is it car?
Qatar. So your son lives in Qatar.
Yeah.
Wow. What does he do over there?
Oh,
What's
I can't
his-
be bothered.
What's his job?
I can't remember.
It's okay. Is it
Okay, so sorry, I'll cut that short, but that gives you a really nice idea of how those techniques can be really effective. So I'm just very aware of time. So the toolbox that you get from using these, or your black bag, so in terms of the key strategies, there's the acknowledgement is your handle, and that your golden rule is that you make your patient feel good. Then sort of on the lid there, you've got how you reveal competency, how you get the information in, how you get it out, and how you verify. And then within your toolbox, all those strategies that we talked about. Okay. Here's some information about where you can get more support. So the community aphasia advisors around New Zealand are happy to give advice and training about how you can communicate effectively with people with aphasia. There's also some online courses with the Aphasia Institute, and you could ask your friendly local SLT if they've got time to give you a bit more support or advice. Very quickly, the last thing I wanted to mention was talking mats as another tool. And this is from Scotland. Maybe I'll just show you the mat. It's a bit blurred. So the mat doesn't actually talk. It's a mat, and you have your clients sitting in front of it. It's their thinking space, their place to make decisions. Talking mats are really good for people who have got very limited ability to express their wishes. And it's really good for those big decisions like discharge destination, or how much formal support they might need, that kind of thing. And you hand them the card and they place it on the mat. And that is actually quite a powerful thing in itself. So you're sitting side by side. The topic in this one is where you live. And you are very careful to be neutral in the way that you ask the question. So it will be, you know, and how do you feel about this? And what about this? And how about this? Rather than skewing questions. And then the person places whether they feel it's a positive, if it's something they're not sure of, or they're neutral about, and then the things they're very unhappy about. So yeah, I think it's a great tool. It takes a bit of setting up and it does take the resources. But if it means the difference between perhaps going to their enduring power of attorney for care and welfare or having them involved, it's just great. So that's it, I think. I think that's my last slide. So now stop sharing. Stop sharing. Right, I'm back. Okay.
That's wonderful, Chris.
Right.
Thank you very much. And Nick, it was a wonderful whip through of very practical tips. I've got several questions online at the moment. Two of them are around about can we get a copy of this video, or am I able to watch this again? We are going to be putting this on the National Stroke Network website, and we have previously put it on the South Island Alliance, but the South Island Alliance is probably not going to be an entity in less than a month's time, or on the 1st of July. So it'll be really the National Stroke Network, but it may take a week or so to get up online live. One of the other questions here is about, can you give an example of how slow to use speech?
Okay, yeah. I think I'm quite a slow speaker anyway, and I do think some people who are faster than I am really do struggle with slowing their speech rate. But it would be, Nick, how are you today? Yeah, that kind of, yeah.
Right.
And then giving Nick plenty of time to actually respond before I go on and say, you know, How was your daughter's first day at school? Yeah, so that kind of thing. Yeah.
And it sounds like we also need to we not only need to slow our speech down, but also slow our tendency to jump in and put the next bit in, and we don't listen.
Yeah, yeah.
Another question here is about, must be very hard when English is the health professional's first language, but it's not for the person with aphasia. Any comments or advice for those situations?
What I should have said right at the start was that all these techniques work very well where English is the second language, because you are using more than talking. So those commonly understood gestures, the written keywords, use of drawing, use of diagrams, all of those things can really help. It's also helpful for people with early stages of dementia, because again, you've got something tangible in front of you. If you've written it down, they're then not having to hold on to that. So yeah, I'm not sure if I've answered that entirely. Have you got any comments, Nick?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. That's some good advice to that listener. Another thing to add to what Chris has described about using these techniques with someone who's got a different first language than yours is that sometimes we've had some very good success with personalizing the communication aid to have those keywords both in their primary language and also in English, sometimes supported by a picture or a photo, and sometimes just the keyword, so that when I point to a referent on the page, I know what I'm pointing to and I know it's got an accurate translation. So that can be a very helpful way of personalizing a communication book to support communication there as well.
Thank you. Another question here is, excellent presentation with great tips, thank you. But any top tips for helping presumably health professionals stopping family jumping in and speaking for the person with aphasia? It probably applies to us as health professionals as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and it is quite hard because often there are people around the bed. Again, I think it's that sort of conversation about the conversation. You need to be quite transparent right from the start about the intention of what you're doing, the importance of allowing the person with aphasia time to respond in their own way in their own time, and that with their permission, you would turn, with the person with aphasia's permission, you would then turn to the family member to ask for support when needed. And I think the other thing is, if you've got a family member who sort of tends to correct the person with aphasia, I think it's very important to reassure everyone that we're just going for shared meaning. You know, we're going, a successful conversation is where both sides have understood each other. We're not aiming for perfection. We're not aiming for grammatical sentences or all the speech sounds to be in the right place. If everyone's got the gist of what's being said, that's great, and we move on. Because, and I think the other thing to reinforce to family members is the incredible energy it takes for someone with aphasia to communicate. So to have to go back and repeat and rephrase something that was understood is not a good thing. Yeah, but yeah, I do think just being really clear from the start what it is you're doing and why you're doing what you're doing. Yeah.
Another question here is about use of eye contact with all the patients and how important is that. I'm going to add to that as well in terms of how good or bad are the current use of masks in terms of impairing communication. So both eye contact and masks. Yeah,
masks are a huge barrier, and I wish there were more masks around with the clear, you know, frame through it where you can actually see the mouth. often people with non-fluent aphasia also have apraxia of speech, which means they might have the word there, but they just can't produce it. And by watching you say the target word, you sort of unlock something and that automaticity comes back. Behind a mask, that's very hard. Our aphasia NZ groups, we've all made the decision, apart from me, I stay masked, but the participants have all decided that they are going to take the risk of not being masked because they really struggle. So if you can socially distance enough from the person and take your mask off to communicate with them, that's brilliant. If you can go outside, that's great. But yeah, the masks are a big barrier. Eye contact, I think it's, I don't know, Nick, you can jump in here too. I think it's important that we are really good observers of the person's non-verbal communication, but often sitting side by side doing a task like the talking mats, there's very little eye contact there. And when I learned about talking mats, one of the women who designed it did a mat with me, and she was talking about all sorts of aspects of my life. And we'd only just met, and here I was sharing my views on our finances and all sorts of things. If we'd been sitting face to face, I don't know that would have been so comfortable. So I think eye contact is important in terms of being able to read each other's non-verbal communication, but you don't have to be staring at somebody. Yeah. I don't know if you've got anything to add, no?
Just confirming kind of my views in line with yours, Chris, that when it comes to eye contact, what I'm more looking for is, like Chris said, being able to interpret someone's facial expression correctly, or their body language, or the other things about how they're using their body that have meaning to me. And beyond that, it becomes a bit of a personal or a cultural preference. Some people find direct eye contact is something that invites them to speak, whereas other people find it quite confrontational to be stared at or put on the spot. So I think that there's probably no hard and fast rules about how to use eye contact effectively.
Unfortunately, we are running out of time, and there are some other questions there, but I'm going to ask you one more, just because I think it has got some generalisation. This person says, I'm African, have an accent, and I usually have to slow down a lot more in it, but I end up speaking unnaturally. Should I start off by having a disclaimer to the patient about that to help?
Yeah, I mean, I do think if you do have accented speech, I think it's a personal thing, but I think it's good again to be transparent. And if you are noticing that even with your slowed speech rate, the person you're talking to isn't understanding you well, that's when you can say, would it help if I wrote that down for you? And start using those other techniques quite early on, even for somebody with good comprehension. Because again, if you are both behind a mask and your speech has an accent and they may have a hearing loss, there's lots of barriers. So I think, yeah, that's where you would go to your other techniques. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Chris. As I just finish off here, but there is a request to put up slide 6 again with the accessible information and guidelines. Could you do that as I put on, share your screen, Chris, just while I wrap up?
I think as the certificates are sent out, you will also get a handout of the slides. So yeah, so expect all of that. And yeah.
Okay, so that'll be on that. So that's wonderful, great.
Yeah.
Well, a very special thanks to Chris and to Nick. It's been a very educational, very enjoyable presentation. I've certainly picked up some tips. So we do really appreciate you spending the time and sharing that with us. I would encourage you all to think not only this was interesting and enjoyable, but what can I apply at work tomorrow? And I know one of the things I've learned, and it's been reinforced today, is really the use of writing the keywords down. And I found it really helpful, not only for my patients who are difficulty expressing themselves, but also those fluent aphasias I have trouble shutting up. But writing the keyword down helps, which always surprised me, but it's good. So I'd encourage you to be thinking, what can I take away and use tomorrow? I would also encourage you really to think that the sort of idea of the passport and the engaging with the person at the beginning, it's very applicable with a person with aphasia, but it's equally applicable to all our patients, really. It's really simple engagement with our patients at an individual, at a person level first, and personhood first, and then the disease comes after that. So those are my take-home points, but I'm thrilled to say we've had a lot of people online. We've had over 100, 110 at one stage. That I think reflects the quality of the talk, and so thank you very much. And as we conclude this Zoom webinar, you'll be emailed a link just for a very short questionnaire. That feedback is really important to us because it does help us modify how we do these. And I just encourage you again to just remember some of these valuable tips you've learned today. Our patients will be far better off for that. So thank you very much, Chris and Nick, and thank you for all the participants on the other end of this computer screen that I can't see. Thank you very much for attending. Ngā mihi nui. Goodbye.